is a little complicated. My name is Reverend Tom Capo, and I am the minister here at Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Miami, or as we affectionately call it, UU Miami. Sometimes Unitarian Universalists think of themselves as the most different religion there is, because we look within for truth and meaning, rather than only from texts, clergy, or traditions. In fact, our Unitarian Universalist fourth principle is to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Today, Unitarian Universalists are being encouraged to be different in a new way, to address structures of racism within our congregation and within our denomination. I offer these words as we begin this time of worship and reflection from the Unitarian Universalist Association Commission on Appraisal's guiding principle. And this is their principle. To keep Unitarian Universalism alive, we must privilege the voices that have been silenced or drowned out and dismantle elitist and exclusionary white privilege, which inhibits connection and creativity. Today, we'll be hearing readings from Widening the Circle of Concern. A report, this is the copy of it here, of the Unitarian Universalist Commission on Institutional Change. It was published in June 2020. The first reading from it is an avatar of a minister of color, Doreen Spotswood. She's black, disabled, femme. And just to be clear, an avatar is not a real person, but an amalgam of real experiences. In these cases, real experiences of people of color within Unitarian Universalism.
While I have experienced harm in various ways as a black person within Unitarian Universalism, most of the harm to me has been done from UU ministers or seminarians. During seminary, I was a quota filler and was told it would be easier if I were not there. I was asked by a colleague during ministry days to park his car. I was invited to preach at a colleague's church, and he put a fellow woman of color colleague's picture on the front cover with my name. On at least 2 occasions, colleagues have argued that they knew more about the experience of racism and oppression than I do, as they marched with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and one had worked with Nelson Mandela. Many colleagues have told me that I am being intimidating and that I should assume goodwill. Many of the candidates for ministry use black and dark in negative ways. When I asked them what their theology of darkness was, they said things like the absence of God, evil, and sinful. When I pressed them about the impact this might have on members of their congregation who identified as black or brown, a white male colleague reprimanded me and defended his use of language and wouldn't back down until a white female colleague affirmed what I was saying.
That was just fabulous, Joseph. Thank you. For a long time, our denomination has encouraged our congregations and fellowships to address racism and oppression in the world through education and activism. From UUs being encouraged to walk with Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, to lobbying and integration in schools, to lobbying Congress for integration in the schools in the 1960s. And then today, providing child care, being encouraged to provide child care for black civil rights marchers as they marched. Again, being supportive of their ability to do the work of justice as they need to do it. And challenging, lobbying, phone calling, letter writing against laws that inhibit the voting rights of people of color. These are things we're doing today and being encouraged to do today. Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country have stayed strong in their resolve to do this work, even as what they have been called to do has evolved over time. Decades ago, this congregation had a cross burned on its property during the Civil Rights era, and they stayed strong in their resolve. And now we have a Black Lives Matter. We have Black Lives Matter banners here in the sanctuary and outside on our property because this is important. This is important work to witness that Black Lives Matter. A few years ago, a religious educator of color applied for a position on the regional staff of our denomination. She was one of 2 candidates who were in the final selection. The other one was a white male minister. When the white male minister was chosen for the position, she questioned the hiring process. And that question resulted in an internal look within our denomination, a look which resulted in an awareness that despite all our anti-racism work, white supremacy culture was entrenched in staffing our denomination. Now our denomination is encouraging Unitarian Universalists to do something different, to be something different, by turning our attention inward, to look within ourselves, within our congregation, within our denomination, for racist ideologies and behavior, as well as any systemic racism in our governance and worship. Because we've come to recognize, at last, that we are steeped in a white supremacist culture. Those who identify as white are part of the system and are, for the most part, unaware of the impact that's being steeped into a white supremacist culture has had on them. And not only had on them, being steeped in this white supremacist culture has affected the people of color in our congregations. And any person of color, for that matter, anybody who comes in the doors of our church wondering if there's a place for them in this liberal religious community. Unfortunately, many people of color who visit Unitarian Universalist congregations, and for that matter, many people of color who are already members of Unitarian Universalist congregations, experience microaggressions, tokenism, and find their voices marginalized, minimized, or ignored. In June 2017, the Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees commissioned a report to find out what was happening within our denomination and within our congregations as it relates to the guiding principle you heard earlier: to keep Unitarian Universalism alive, we must privilege the voices that have been silenced or drowned out, and dismantle elitist and exclusionary white privilege, which inhibits connection and creativity. These are from that report, Widening the Circle. As I was reading this document, which, by the way, you can purchase, or you can purchase it in this like this, or you can get it as a PDF or an audio file if you go to uua.org. So as I read it, and Shay as well, I wondered a number of things. And that's what we're sharing with you here today. Friends, we live in a transactional culture. We look for what we can get out of anything we put time, energy, or resources into. I help you, I expect you will help me. You do work for me, I pay you for this work. And it's tempting to think in terms of what we will get out of doing this anti-racism, decentering whiteness, and addressing white privilege. Some might think, well, more people of color will join our congregation. Some might think, with more people of color, our congregation will be more creative, find new ways to worship or govern ourselves. We might even learn more about other cultures. My friends, this is a very Western attitude, and it's a very white-centered attitude. What changes if we approach this work in the same way we approach meditation? Without expectation, without desire, without doing some kind of cost-benefits analysis. But instead, do this work because we feel called to it by our principles to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. What if we did this work not because we want to grow the church, but because of our own internal sense of ethics or morals? What if we did this work because we felt it was just plain the right thing to do? And while doing this work, opening ourselves up and listening with mind and heart, we receive nothing. No new members, no new relationships. Speaking only for myself, I'm okay with that. If we do this work looking for how it's going to benefit us, me, how my self-esteem might improve, or how I'll be gifted with new insights, I have an eye on what I'm hoping to get, which keeps me, a white man, from attending fully with my mind and heart on what I'm doing. My work will only be half-hearted. Looking for what I might get keeps me from seeing what I might be able to give. Can keep me from seeing what someone else might need. Let me share with you what Mary Bryan, one of the members of the UUA Commission on Institutional Change, again, one of the ones that wrote this book, Widening the Circle, reflected on as she did this work. When I moved past claiming my innocence and building these white supremacy systems and denying their racist intent, to seeing them, really seeing them, how they operate, I couldn't unsee the injustice. It's in the news every day, everywhere. Keeping quiet, doing nothing, isn't an option for me in a faith that proclaims that we respect the inherent worth and dignity of all people. There is no dignity in economic and educational systems that create such inequitable outcomes. White people build these, and white people are required to dismantle these unjust, inequitable, and cruel systems, to completely transform them. I know I couldn't do this transformational work unless I was willing to get uncomfortable, to start by acknowledging my role in our systems and in the ways I participate in upholding our dominant white culture. Doing that through conflict avoidance, through assuming good intentions are enough, through denial, tokenism, white savior behavior. It's hard to see these things in myself. But I need to see it and change it in order to live the principles I believe. It's part of my spiritual practice. I practice humility and forgiveness for myself and my community as a spiritual work when we engage in dismantling white supremacist systems. I recognize I'm going to make mistakes. And I also know I will acknowledge them and try to repair the harms. I try not to let the fear stop me. And I'll try to stay curious about when and where my discomfort arises. Every time I make a new discovery about my thinking that releases limiting thoughts and behavior, I feel more free. And that too is spiritual work. This avatar is a lay leader of color. We'll call her Mallory Ramesh. She's a board member of a congregation, age 35, Indian, queer, and a social activist.
Are you sure you want diversity? I joined my local UU church after meeting some UUs at a Black Lives Matter rally after a local unarmed black man was killed. The UUs I met were members of a church in a nearby city. So I did some online research and picked my home church because they had information about becoming a welcoming congregation on their website. After a couple of months of attending service and a book club, the minister asked me to join the board. I thought this was kind of rushed. At the book club, I noticed that whenever any question about people of color came up, I was the one everybody turned to look at. I'm Indian. It was funny considering that my suggestion that we add pronouns to our name tags was dismissed by the woman heading the LGBTQ council. Even though I am also queer, I thought I could do some good as a board member, so I agreed. Despite reluctance by some established church leaders, we participated in the white supremacy teach-in worship service to explore issues of white supremacy culture within our congregation. Though even then, our involvement was limited to a single service and reflection. At the following board meeting, I inquired about how we plan to implement the recommendations from the teach-in, adopting the 8th principle in doing a church-wide racism audit. Our outgoing, settled minister shut down the conversation and suggested it would be more appropriate to bring up the issue with our interim minister. When I did so at the following meeting, the interim minister said she wanted to wait until she'd gotten to know the congregation a little better. The next month, our interim said again she wanted more time. At the following meeting, the issue was pushed to the end of the agenda. And when another issue turned into a long discussion, the majority of the board members decided it was too late to discuss anything else and voted to table the meeting. Leading up to the next meeting, I wrote 2 emails to our board secretary asking for the issue to be placed on the meeting agenda. Both emails were ignored before they finally responded to the third. At the meeting, I decided to bring up my concerns with how the recommendations had been handled, especially concerning that the adoption of a practice regarding environmental justice had passed easily with no similar delays. The board secretary, a white woman, immediately centered herself and her own discomfort, framing the situation as an attack on herself by me. The issue was left unresolved at the end of the meeting. It was extremely uncomfortable for me. During this period, my relationship with the board members in question soured, and several church members engaged in a whisper campaign against me, seemingly targeting my social justice views, with one member joking that I had issued a fatwa against mentioning us presidents in sermons after I'd related complaints about an Independence Day reflection. Unwilling to encounter this on Sunday mornings, I stopped attending. Though I finished my board term, I missed meetings, I dropped out of the book club, and no longer attended anything at the congregation.
I invite you now, take a deep, slow breath. Turn your attention within yourself. Notice what is stirring. Thoughts, feelings, physical or emotional. Take out the paper and pencil or pen that you brought to the surface. And I want you to write on there a few words. Describe what's going on with you as you listened to Shay talk about that particular person being part of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Whatever you write, it doesn't have to be coherent. Don't edit it. Just jot down a few words about how it made you feel and what thoughts you had. And breathe again, deep and slow. The next avatar is a religious professional of color. Let's call her Jessie Anya. She is Afro, Latinx, indigenous, queer, and a baby boomer.
Are you sure you want diversity? I came into Unitarian Universalism because I was queer. Sure, I no longer believed in the kind of God of the church where I was born. I probably would have stayed in my old church for the music and the people in the community if I hadn't been a lesbian. That was non-negotiable. When I came into my first UU congregation, someone asked me if I wouldn't be more comfortable down the street at the Catholic church. And on my second visit, someone asked if they could touch my hair to see how it felt. The message, though, it spoke to me about how we all have worth and dignity. The service the next week was about racial justice and immigration, and I wanted to come back. I have lived in a lot of places that were not too good at welcoming me. I was working as a sociological professor then, so I kept coming back and I brought my kids. Pretty soon I was asked to be on the membership committee and then the religious education committee and the board. We had districts back then. And when I was asked to be on that board as well, at my first district meeting, someone brought up their concerns that the site we had chosen for our conference was in a mixed neighborhood. And they wanted to be sure people would be safe. I lost it. And we had to call in a consultation from the UUA staff who seemed like she had never been a part of a conversation about race before. When she got nervous, she used the term colored people instead of people of color. A couple of the other board members defended her, saying it was just words. I ended up taking over the session and facilitating the conversation. At the end, people understood a lot more about the experience of people of color in this nation. And by the next meeting, I was thinking that maybe I needed to be doing this for a living. When a job working for the district opened up, I applied and I got it. My bilingualism was sometimes welcome, but my biculturalism and my ideals on how to accomplish the objectives within my responsibility were constantly unwelcomed. I had to visit a lot of churches. It was troubling the way that Black and African diaspora music was appropriated within UU churches, many times as a way to perform multiculturalism. Another disturbing thing is the way people of color are erased. For example, a church with 3 Black members might hear comments at congregational meetings such as, "We are an all-white church." And I cannot count the number of times I have objected when someone has asked, "Well, we don't have any diversity in this room," only to have the response be, "Oh, I mean Black people like real people of color." I had a lot of background in meetings, organizational development, and all of that. One time I showed up to help a congregation deal with a problem with their finances, and an older white man from the finance committee said, "We don't need someone to talk to us about race relations, we need someone to understand numbers." A younger board member stepped in and called him in. However, that incident and so many other little jabs stuck with me. My supervisor changed a couple of times, and then we did away with districts. I went to seminary and made my way through a reading list that had only a few authors of color then, and my complaints and those of some of my classmates helped change the reading list. I went into mega debt to get through. For my first cycle of candidating, I was asked to candidate in 5 different places, but wasn't offered a call. I had to go back to consulting and also take up a temp job to wait until the next cycle. It was the same thing, except it was called to a small congregation that had 3 ministers in 5 years. They had no board policies and made us think when I tried to get them to put some in place. I lasted there for 4 years, working around the clock. When I left, I knew I had made it longer than any of the last 3 ministers, but I was beaten up. One of my kids was a teenager and got so sick of seeing what that had done to me that she quit the faith. I took a job as an associate minister in a larger congregation. The senior minister had done some work, and I can call her on stuff when it comes up. Someday I might want to try to be the number 1 again, but the way Unitarian Universalists have to always resist the authority and the way they resisted my strong womanist style just wore out my last nerves. I think looking back over my decade of involvement with Unitarian Universalism that I was too polite for too long. Some of my younger colleagues of color come in now and they are much more real. I get through my days, I do what I need to do, and sometimes I say what I need to say. You sing songs without understanding the history, the pain, and the faith that birthed them. You change the words without understanding how that distinctly changes the meaning of our songs. Yes, a lot has changed in a lot more congregations. People wouldn't try to violate my body or touch me or try to send me to another church. And every day someone says something ignorant, truly ignorant, about someone who looks like my mama or my aunties or my kids, and that takes a toll, it really does. Why do I stay, you ask? Because what we believe is what I believe, and no color owns that. and because the young people coming in are fierce, and I can't help but want to see where that goes.
I invite you to breathe once again. Deep breath. Turn your attention within yourself. Notice what is stirring. Thoughts, feelings, physical or emotional. And take out your paper once again and write down just a few words to describe what is going on within you. Doesn't have to be coherent. Don't edit it. Just jot a few words down. And as you are ready, take a deep, slow breath.
Are you sure you want diversity? Then tell me why. Let's not make diversity a popularity contest like so many other things. We don't want to have diversity just to check some type of box off. Diversity in UU should not be treated like the NBA, like the NBA's Black Lives Matter campaign. We're talking about more than marketing. For me, diversity is important here because it will make this congregation more aligned with the principles of this faith. That's the long and the short for me. As a person of color, the first thing I noticed when I visited this congregation was that there was a very small number of people of color. This would likely happen to you if you visited a congregation that was full of people of color and it was very few white people present. In some ways, it makes you feel sort of like a unicorn. In other ways, it very much so feels like walking on eggshells. But if diversity is what we are looking to achieve, then we will need to start looking more like a Crayola box than we do right now. But what does this mean for UU Miami? How will UU Miami be able to welcome others and create a diverse space intentionally? Where will these diverse people come from? What do we need to do to help you be able to prepare for this change? These are all questions to ponder when we truly look at the why and how diversity will work here. Because when we open the doors to diversity, the audience who arrives, it won't be on our terms. We won't determine their socio-economical background, their criminal record, their educational attainment, or their choice of clothing. Diversity does not only mean people who are different race. Diversity is people who are different from you. We may get Trump supporters, Republicans, and people who are pro-police to walk through our liberal doors and want to be a part of our community, a diverse and different community. They may look different from our audience. How will we be able to welcome them? To me, this is the real work of being a UU. Not just talking about it, but being about it. Digging deep and doing self-work. Holding space for those who are different from us, and in time forming a community that truly represents nurturing all families in a multi-faith world.
Once more, I invite you to take a deep breath. And turn your attention within yourself. Notice what is stirring. Thoughts, feelings, physical or emotional. And again, take out your paper and just jot down a few words about what's going on within you. It doesn't have to be coherent. It doesn't need to be edited. Just jot it down. And when you're done, take a deep breath again. Now sit with the words that you wrote in response to the readings and in response to Shay's heartfelt sharing. Lean into the discomfort you feel and try not to redefine that discomfort. If you identify as white, try not to center those words in your white response, but hear them as they were offered from within you. And reflect on what you heard and what that brought up. If you identify as black, indigenous, or a person of color, you might want to talk to another person of color about your words, to reflect on them. I do invite all of you to join us in our Zoom coffee hour to discuss this experience. To share what you choose to share. Only what you choose. You don't need to choose to say everything. But what you share will be fodder for us to begin a process of reflection, of learning, of growing, and perhaps of transformation. I leave you with these words by Unitarian Universalist Reverend Yolanda Pierce, Reverend Dr. Yolanda Pierce. Let us not value a false peace over a righteous justice. Let us not be afraid to sit in the ugliness and the messiness and the pain that is life in community together.